So why I'm an atheist and you should be too. This will be broken up into two parts. One, why atheism is true. And two, why atheism is useful. I think sometimes people argue as if these are the same thing. They're not, because something can be true, but not useful. And something can be untrue, but useful. I think atheism is true and useful. It's not something I've talked about a lot as a comedian. If you guys have stumbled across my YouTube page from my comedy. And this is for two reasons. One, I think it's just covered. I mean, George Carlin talked a lot about it. Jim Jeffries, Ricky Gervais, so in some ways, at least from like a comedic perspective, I don't think I have anything to add. And second, I came up in New York City, doing comedy. So you had to be likable the whole time. Right. And few things are more unlikable in America, than being an atheist, and especially being snarky about it. Right. So I figured I'd take the time to talk about it here. So a little bit of background about me, of course, I think your ideas should just stand on their own. You either have good ideas or bad ideas. But I think especially with the topic of religion, people are curious, where your perspective comes from. I think when I tell people I'm an atheist, which isn't often, I think actually the last time I even said it unprompted, I was in a bar in the Czech Republic. And this is when I was still a drinking man. I talked with this Romanian guy. And he said, listen, you believe in God, right? And I just matter-of-factly said, no, I don't. And he was so surprised by that answer. I think I'm the first person he's met that answered no to that question, which is interesting because, Romania is a Catholic country. It's almost like I told him I don't think dogs exist. He was like, "What? I didn't know people could feel that way." But I think Romania is also a very Catholic country, and I grew up Catholic. So okay, here's my background in terms of religion. So both my parents are Catholic. My mom was very Catholic. I say was, she still is, but she used to be a church every Sunday type of person. And she also taught CCD. I do not know what CCD stands for, but it's the Catholic version of Sunday school, which happens on a weekday evening, usually after school. Basically, if you don't go to Catholic school, you go to public school, you go to CCD at night if you want to get all of the Catholic sacraments as a child, right? So she's very religious. A moderate politically, so doesn't have any extreme beliefs about, at the time, gay marriage or abortion or anything like that. My dad is religious too, and he went to church every Sunday when my mom went to church every Sunday, right? So I think probably he would agree with this statement, is that he's religious, but less religious than my mom. Definitely believes in God though. So I was raised religious. I went to Catholic school and CCD until I received all the, I went to public school and CCD first. And then from 7th to 12th grade, I went to Catholic school, received all the sacraments, went to church every Sunday until I didn't have to anymore, which was around 16, right? I told my mom I didn't believe in God at 16, and she made me go to church anyway for a couple of months. And then at some point, I guess she realized, well, this is kind of pointless. He's so close to adulthood that he could probably make his own decisions now. And maybe making him to go to church won't make him change his mind. And of course it didn't. So what made me change my mind? It really was an intellectual exercise for me. I think sometimes people assume that something tragic happened and you lost your faith. I think even the phrase lost your faith implies that something so dramatic happened that you thought to yourself, how can there be a good and loving God? And that's not the case for me. I had a pretty easy childhood. Nothing to complain about, middle class, no deaths outside of my grandparents. So nothing really to be super sad or frustrated about. I've always had red hair, which sucks, but that's it. So I read The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, right? The End of Faith by Sam Harris, and God is Not Great by Richard Hitchens, R.I.P. to a real one. And yeah, those kind of gave me my perspective. So now that we've got my background out of the way, let's talk about it. First part, I want to talk about why I believe atheism to be true. Now, atheism is nothing more than a belief that there is not a God, right? So it's not a belief system beyond that. And I've met atheists that like religion but don't subscribe to one. I've met anti-theists, which they believe that even if a God existed, that by nature of there being evil in the world, that he's either not omnipotent or not omnibenevolent, or possibly neither. I subscribe more to that view, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. As I said earlier, the argument of whether it's true is separate from the argument of is it useful, right? And the reason I say this is because in the few religious debates I've had with people, and I'll explain more about that later, because I'm not wearing a shirt that says, "Ask me why I'm an atheist." That was very popular in the early 2010s. I've never done that, and I'll explain about that why later. But the few debates that I've had with friends who are religious people, and a common reason for their belief in God is that it makes them feel good, or that not believing would just feel terrible. And, there's all these existential reasons, which is, interesting. It's, of course, something can be useful, but not true. Right. So it's interesting. You talk to some people and they don't even understand the difference. So why don't I believe in God? I would say the main reason when I found out about this, that was like the nail in the coffin, and it is Occam's razor. So Occam, don't worry about him. I didn't even take the time to remember his first name, but he was a theologian, and I want to say the 14th or 15th century, right? Dude, how disrespectful. I should know something about him. I even took the time to make notes. But Occam, if you're listening, then my understanding of how the world works is very flawed. But here's Occam's razor. When faced with multiple explanations for a phenomenon, the simplest explanation is usually the most accurate. Okay, so for example, if you are on an elevator and the elevator goes up and the doors open, and you see the number 2, on the wall, followed by door signs that say like 201, 202, 203, you're on the second floor, right? Then you go up one level, the doors open. I guess someone pushed all the buttons in the elevator. And now you see the letter, fucking idiot, the number 3, and then, 301, 302, 303. Now, what's more likely? The elevator moved from the second floor to the third floor, or when the elevator door closed, the elevator didn't move, but in that time, someone changed all the numbers from 201 and 202 to 301 and 302. Now, both are possible, but the first one, you don't need any more steps. There's just one step. All you have to prove is that we live in a world where there's levels to buildings and that elevators go up and down. For the second proposition to be true, you'd have to say that we live in a world where someone regularly likes to play a prank on people where they change the numbers on the elevator. So the first one's probably more likely. Now, how do I apply this to the existence of God? Well, basically, there's the problem of the universe, right? So the universe is here. Why is the universe here? How did it come to existence? Now, the theists answer to that question. People that believe in God say that God created the universe. And then, of course, the obvious question is, who created God? And most people will say that God has always existed. You might talk to an oddball that says he was invented by an even more powerful God, but then that just kicks the can down the road. So either the universe has always existed, or God has always existed and he created the universe. if we apply Occam's razor to these options, Occam's razor tells us it's better to conclude simply that the universe has always existed. Second reason I don't believe in God, the burden of proof falls on someone making the assertion. Now, the statement God exists is an assertion. It's a really popular assertion, especially in the United States, especially in the developing world. But it's an assertion nonetheless. So if you say something exists, it is up to you to prove it. You can't prove a negative. It's impossible to do. The philosopher Bertrand Russell, he invented what's called Russell's teapot, right? So in Russell's teapot, this is a thought experiment where he basically says, there's an invisible teapot in the universe. You can't see it. You can't look for it. It's intangible, but it's there. Prove that it isn't. Of course, that is impossible to do. If you want to prove that a teapot's there, you're the one saying the teapot's there. You got to prove it's there, right? Lastly, the problem with faith. So we should define, what is faith? I define faith as believing something without evidence. And I, of course, think it's bad to believe something without evidence, but this could even be a neutral statement. It doesn't necessarily have to be pejorative. I think a religious person would phrase it differently, but that is essentially what we mean by faith. Now, faith can mean other things by, faith could mean something like hope, right? Like, I have faith that I will be successful. Well, of course, that not being successful is an option, but through positive thinking, you're looking at the world as if you will be successful. Another example that a friend actually, when we were talking about this, brought up to me. He said, well, you have faith that you will wake up tomorrow. And my answer to that, of course, is no, I don't. The answer to Bobby, will you wake up tomorrow, is I don't know. Now, will I act as if I will? Yes, because two reasons. One, life would be utter chaos if I act as if that wasn't the case. And two, it's a statistic probability that I'm more likely to die when I'm 24. I'm more likely to die when I'm 94 versus 34. But of course, my answer to the question, will you wake up tomorrow, is I don't know. Most religious people, when they talk about their faith, they're talking about a realm that is outside scientific discourse, right? So we apply the scientific method to everything. A silly example is if, I don't know why this is the first thing I thought of. Imagine a world in which we're still using DVD players, right? So if your DVD player is not working, if you're getting like a bad signal on your TV, what you would do probably is change the input to see if you could still watch the television, right? Before you can conclude that your TV is broken, right? So one acts as the control and one is the problem. That applies to everything. I am a hard materialist in that way. Everything that we could think about, there are things that are unknowable. For example, how many fish live in the sea? We can't know that, but it has an answer. There is an exact number of fish that live in the sea now. We might never be able to answer that question, but it has an answer. Typically, and you'll hear even scientists who are religious believers say that there is something outside of whatever you want to say, scientific inquiry, reason, logic, and that is faith, right? I think that it's a false dichotomy. If you want to talk about what happens after death, if you want to talk about the creation of consciousness, all of that has to be in the realm of things that are proven and things that cannot be proven, right? There can't be a third category where you believe because it either feels good to believe or it's virtuous to believe. That's one of the most fascinating stories in the Bible. It's in the Christian Bible and the Gospels. I believe it's in all 4 Gospels, but don't quote me on that. I swear to God, if you quote me on that, I'll be fucking pissed. But it's doubting Thomas, right? St. Thomas is the only one of the apostles that refuses to believe that Jesus is risen from the dead, right? Peter comes and tells him, Jesus, he's been dead for 3 days, but he's back from the dead. And Thomas says, I will only believe that. And this gets kind of gross. I don't think Thomas had to go this far. He says, I'll only believe that if I could put my hands inside his wounds. Now, for me, it's enough to just look at his wounds. You know what I mean? I'm not that hard of a skeptic. But Jesus comes back and Thomas like falls to his knees and says, I'm sorry for not believing Jesus. And Jesus says, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's a close approximation. He says, you believe because you see. Blessed are those that don't see, but still believe. And I think that's the foundation of every religion, at least all 3 Abrahamic religions. And I don't even understand why it would be virtuous. I don't understand why it would be virtuous to believe something without evidence. Moving on. Why is it useful? So why is atheism useful? Well, here's what I'm not going to do. It's outside the scope of this video. I'm not going to tell you why religion is terrible. Briefly, I'll just say that without religion, abortion would be legal in every state and the Twin Towers would still be standing. And I'm just going to leave it there. Hey, that will make a good YouTube short, huh? But I will say, I will concede this to religious people. If you believe in a world with an afterlife, death is better. I think the most logical conclusion, if you don't believe in God or an afterlife, is that consciousness ceases when your brain dies, right? That's called eternal oblivion, which is a spooky way of saying a spooky thing, which is that once your brain's gone, it's lights out. That's it. I think that's been brought up in most debates I've had with friends, which is basically like, hey man, the idea that this is all there is fucking depressing. And sometimes even nihilism sneaks in. You get people going, well, if there's nothing out of this, then what's the point? Which, I don't know. If you think about it a little more, it doesn't really have much salience for me, because if we apply that to anything else, I don't think it would make sense. For example, if you're going to see a movie, the movie is going to end, and you can never watch that movie for the first time ever again. Right. I mean, I was a blackout drinker for many years, so I've seen a movie for the first time a couple times, but under more normal circumstances, you can't. Right. You still enjoy the movie, the whole time. You're not going, well, we're 45 minutes into this, and start having a mid-movie crisis, right? You're like, what the hell is the meaning of the last 45 minutes of this movie? Well, the meaning is just that you're going to enjoy it. In fact, if you were sitting down to watch an infinite movie, a movie that never ends, eventually you would walk out of the theater. The second reason why I think it's useful, and again, this is not an argument for why it's true, because those are 2 different arguments, but I think it's comforting to know that there is no plan. I remember I had a conversation with a family member of mine. And this is kind of intense, but their father passed away at a young age after being sick for very long. And she asked her mother, why was he taken from us so soon, especially when I prayed for him not to be? And she responded, God answered your prayer. It just wasn't the answer you wanted, which is really poignant. And she found comfort in that. He was listening, but he has a plan outside of you, right? And it's an interesting argument because God is infinitely wise. I mean, probably something, and I've heard this analogy before. It's like thinking about God's plan is like an ant thinking about our plan, right? Like an ant seeing you walking to the refrigerator doesn't even know what a refrigerator is, right? But if there's no plan, then tragedies are just tragedies. That's all they are, I think if someone close to me died in a car accident tomorrow, the cause of that would be, I don't know, whatever the cause was. Someone's decision to drive drunk, a freak accident, a Cybertruck blowing up. I don't have any loved ones that drive a Cybertruck, but that would be it. I would mourn their loss, but I wouldn't be tormented by the question of why, because there is no why, right? Outside of the causal things that led up to it, Christopher Hitchens, I mentioned him earlier. He died of cancer. And when he was dying from cancer, he said, I briefly asked, why me? And the cosmos barely bothers to give its response. Why not? Bad things happen to good and bad people, and good things happen to good and bad people. And there's other reasons to be good other than wanting good things to come your way, either here or in the next life. And why to be good is something out of the scope of this video. But if you're thinking about being bad versus good, fellas, ladies, be good. Another reason why I think it's useful is I think in general, show me the evidence is a great heuristic, right? I think that if you live your life being skeptical, which is different than being disagreeable. And I know that they're different because I'm both. I am skeptical and very agreeable. When someone who looks normal, there's nothing about their outward appearance or demeanor that leads me to believe they have something nefarious in mind. If they stop me on the street, I act as if they're stopping me out of good faith. They either have something of value to give me or I have something of value to give them. That sounded sexual and I didn't mean it to be. So yeah, I think show me the evidence is always a great heuristic. It doesn't have to be cold. You could be open. You could be open to things. I listen to telemarketers. Isn't that crazy? But I always operate under the assumption that the thing they're selling me might make no sense. And it might even be a scam. And I think that's a good way to be. Okay, so all of this shit clinking around in my head, what do I do with it? Well, I believe two things at once, and they sound contradictory, but they're not. If you're an atheist, you can't be militant, but do be unapologetic. And here's what I mean by this. I referenced the early 2010s, kind of the neckbeard aesthetic of, a shirt that says, I'm an atheist, debate me. That's annoying. Don't be annoying. We'll talk about why you shouldn't be annoying later, but it's bad vibes all around. It's kind of like if you're vegan, right? If someone asks you, hey, I noticed you're vegan. Why? Be free to tell them the answer, but don't just walk into McDonald's and slap the burgers out of people's hands. That's wrong. So don't be militant, but do be unapologetic. So what do I mean by that? You don't have to offer an apology. If you believe this way, you believe this way. The default in, not in the West, but in the United States and in a lot of developing countries is that God exists, right? That's what most people think. And they talk and act as if that's true. And that's their prerogative to do. You don't have to be disrespectful. You don't have to be militant, but you don't have to be apologetic either. I remember I had a conversation at work one time. I used to work at a supermarket, and when my grandfather passed away, I had a coworker say, I'm sorry for your loss, which is you really don't need to say anything after I'm sorry for your loss. There's nothing more to say. You say that and you just be there for them, right? But he did what a lot of people do, a lot of religious people do, is that they add the next thing, which is he's in a better place, right? And he's a religious person. So he believes if you're a good person and you die, you go to heaven, right? So that's what he means by a better place. We all know that. And I said, thank you so much. I don't think that's how the world works, but I appreciate the sentiment. And he was like understandably taken aback by that. But I don't think I was being rude. I think, okay, if the tables are turned, someone is experiencing loss, that's not the best. You shouldn't do the opposite of what religious people often do. I would argue if you're a religious person, you shouldn't say what he did, even though I think he had the best of intentions. But if someone's grandpa dies, don't say, hey, just so you know, nothing happens. He's gone. Don't do that. But I think that it's a great opportunity if you're experiencing loss and someone brings up an afterlife. That's the moment to be like, I don't think that's how the world works. And hey, maybe you're planting a seed that there could be another way of thinking about things. And at the very least, you're being yourself. And my whole thing is be yourself and don't be an asshole. So that's what being not militant but unapologetic means. So in this moment, I am euphoric, not because of any phony God's blessings, but because I am enlightened by my intelligence. Tips Fedora. All right, that last part is a meme. If you guys Google in this moment, I am euphoric if you want a good laugh. I think that guy started the Fedora meme, which if you're unfamiliar, I guess if you're not a millennial, you might not know the Fedora meme. But basically, it's shorthand for neckbeards, which I'm fucking growing one myself right here. But that's purely out of laziness, and I hate Mountain Dew. But if you want to call me a neckbeard in the YouTube comments, go ahead. Since I do kind of have one going on now, and I'm not really annoyed by any mean comments. Sometimes they're really funny, and sometimes they are annoying. But take annoying things as they come, which leads me to the next thing I want to talk about, which is how to deal with annoying people.